When Star Wars Hunters just soft launched last week, we were given two heroes that are classified as tanks, Grozz and Slingshot. Now, both of these are fantastic hunters, but I think that there's one that is clearly better than the other. So let's talk about how these two compare in a couple of different areas and why I think, well, I'll tell you what I think in just a minute. Let's dive in. Before we go too far here, let's go ahead and talk about the areas that I consider to be important for a tank. Now, obviously, the first is going to be our ability to absorb damage. This is, again, kind of what the tank is meant to do. They're a bullet sponge, right? So our ability to jump in front of the rest of our team, take the enemy's aggro, and really be able to let some of our damage dealers and healers do what they need to do unhindered is going to be a really important part of being that tank. Now, the second area is going to be the damage dealing ourselves. So obviously, we don't want to just sit there and take shots. We want to actually be able to dish out a few ourselves. And then finally, the ability to affect the enemy's mobility or just our own mobility to get into spots where we can get into the thick of things. So those are going to be the three areas that we're really looking at today. But before I do anything else, let's go ahead and meet our contestants for today's celebrity deathmatch or face-off or whatever we want to call it. For Grozz, we do have the improvised clubs, staggering blow, and boulder bash. For each of these, we are going to be basically a melee type of hero, with the boulder bash being a little bit more ranged. Now, in terms of his loadout here, you do have Stampede, which is where he charges forward and basically picks somebody up, gives him a big bear hug, and then smashes him into a wall. Warcry, which lets him heal, and then Frenzy, which is basically a short-range blow, fast shooting thing. I don't really know how else to describe that. I know that's not the most articulate. But then on Slingshot side, we are going to be using the twin blaster cannons, which are going to be a ranged weapon rollout, which allows us to, instead of just kind of click, clack, click, clack along, we actually start doing the rolly droid thing because that's what he is. And then Rocket Stomp is basically the nice, large, kind of Mario Party butt slam, you know, where he like jumps up and hovers and then slams and then jumps up and hovers and slams. You get the point. Now, for his loadout, we do have the Unstable Shield, which is going to allow us to absorb some damage. And then when it does pop, it will pop with spectacular fashion and be able to actually damage some enemies around us. Trick Shot, which is basically where he rolls around and starts to just knock people out of the way. And then Scatter Boom, which is kind of like a short-range shotgun, if you will, with missiles and explodey things that really makes for a really fun animation. Now that we've met our hunters, let's talk about the first area that I want to compare them to, and that is going to be their ability to absorb damage. Now, innately, Grozz does have the advantage here because he has base HP of 400 versus Slingshot, which only has 300. The way that some of this kind of plays out, though, is that with Grozz, you do have a little bit less temporary health, I'll say, because when Slingshot pops that shield, he gets about an extra 150. So he ends up with about 450 total HP. Now, that being said, you can't really do much with the unstable shield up with Slingshot. You can't roll out, you can't activate Trick Shot or anything like that, so you're kind of stuck in that position. That kind of defeats some of the purpose because if the enemy gets around us or they're able to get into, again, kind of our damage dealers or our support, you lose a lot of that health in trying to reposition. So while at first glance we look at that and we do have the abilities and we say, okay, well, you know, Grozz has 400, but then you really have 450 with Slingshot with the shield, you might be tempted to say, okay, well, let's go ahead and take Slingshot. But the fact of the matter is that not only does the shield explode and you lose that, but you also can't really do anything with your abilities other than the scatter shot while that shield is active. So while you are able to still shoot and move around at a very slow rate, you're kind of stuck in position, which can be problematic if the enemy gets around you or if you're playing something like Hut Ball, where you have to be on the move constantly. With that being said, Grozz does also have the advantage of when he heals, the Warcry does give him an actual permanent health boost to any damage that he's taken. So if you're out of combat, you can actually use that to heal yourself, as opposed to having to find a power-up that you would then need as Slingshot. So overall for this category, I think that Grozz is the winner when it comes to its ability to handle damage. Now, the second area that we wanted to compare is the ability to actually deal damage. And in this one, I think that Slingshot really shines because all of his abilities are offensive. So if you look at the unstable shield, not only does that give us some extra health, but when it pops, it does also kind of send out this scatter pulse or shock pulse that will damage enemies around him. Then obviously with Scatter Boom and the Trick Shot, you do end up dealing some damage in both of those cases. Now, obviously, Grozz has the advantage in close combat because of those big clubs and the staggering blows. He's able to kind of stop people from moving around and getting away as easily, whereas with Slingshot, you do have a little bit less of an advantage in close combat, and if you're trying to be at the front and, again, absorbing that damage, it can be a little bit misplaced. So with that being said, I do like Slingshot. I think that I would give him just a little bit of an edge there over Grozz. And then finally, the last area is the mobility, both our ability to move around the map and to engage on our own terms, as well as the ability to impact the enemy's mobility and kind of pin people down and make sure that we're able to isolate them as needed. Now, this is where I think Grozz really shines, because especially if you have the Stampede followed by a Frenzy, you can really basically pin somebody up against the wall so they can't get away and just unload on them with that Frenzy attack. And we can't discount the fact that Grozz does have the staggering blows, which will basically help kind of natively keep people pinned regardless, so they can't get around quite as easily, or if you're playing Hutball, they can't quite as easily get to the objective. Now, Slingshot is still a very good hunter when it comes to the mobility. Obviously, his passive of being able to roll out gives him that extra speed boost and lets him reposition very quickly. However, as a tank, it does feel a little bit odd to need to be kiting and kind of moving around because, again, you want to get into the action and really step up and take some of those blows for your team. And so his abilities just don't really seem to match that or to play with that as much, in my opinion. Now, his Trick Shot ability is kind of nice because it does knock people back a little bit, but it's not substantial enough, I think, to really make a big difference at this time. The other thing to consider here is when you are using Stampede with Grozz, you actually bear hug somebody and move them out of the way. So if, for example, you're able to isolate one of those squishy healers, you can get them out of the combat so that they can't be healing your enemies, and your team might be able to turn the tide a little bit. I think that paired with the, again, just kind of odd pairing of Slingshot's abilities when it comes to mobility gives Grozz the advantage here. So overall, if you guys haven't guessed, it's kind of 2-to-1 here. I think Grozz is the better play overall if you are looking to do a tank build. But let me know down in the comments below if you agree or if you think I'm off my rocker. Either way, I'm looking forward to testing out both of these hunters in much more detail, and I'm really excited to keep playing these and just kind of test out how the game mechanics work as we get closer and closer to the full launch. With that being said, make sure that you like and subscribe so that you are constantly updated as I'm posting new videos and giving thoughts. I'd love to have more of a discussion down in the comments or on Discord, so hit me up and I'd love to see you there. But until next time, thanks so much for joining. Have a great day, weekend, whenever you're watching this, and may the Force be with you.